this idea that if I feel like I'm doing really good work, I will actually, my brain, there's facets of my brain that will change, that then I will actually do better work. And Pygmalion effect was a really interesting study where they took kids that were in a school, and they basically told the teacher that these kids scored really high on this intelligence test, when in fact they hadn't. It was just random. They just picked random kids, but the kids that they said performed better on this IQ test, at the end of the year when they tested them, actually did improve much higher than anybody else in the class, because they told the teacher set those expectations, the teacher started treating them differently, and their performance, thus their self-identity, changed, and they improved.
Yeah, so it's great to have you, Dr. Nelson.
Hey, I only make my enemies call me doctor, so you guys can just call me Kurt. There you go.
Right. Okay, so I think we'll jump right into the meat of the discussion, Dr. Nelson. So we'll like to know a little bit about the 4-drive model that you use to energize and to engage people. And let us set the context here for our audiences, because our audiences are primarily people who are in marketing and advertising and creative industries, and who often work in teams, and the organizations are teamwork, team-led, and even the output is also like an idea or a campaign, or let's say a strategy, which involves collaboration, and which involves everybody to participate.
So the 4-drive model, just to give a little bit of a background, was developed by Nitin Nohria and Paul Lawrence of Harvard. Unfortunately, Paul Lawrence has passed on, but Nitin Nohria is the dean of the business school. So it has some pretty good background in how it was developed. And the basic concept of the 4-drive model basically says we have some fundamental underlying drives that motivate us, that get us going and keep us moving. Now, there's lots of other things that motivate us, but these are 4 real key underlying drives. And they start with, they're in a really easy ABCD model. So the very first one is this element of where we think about what actually gets you motivated going, right? And so there's achievement, that is that element of having this achievement, and acquisition, the acquire drive. So we are motivated to acquire resources, things, objects, money, and to have those achievements lauded for us. And we will do a lot for that. And that's what most companies look at, right? They look at your pay, they look at bonuses, they look at incentives. Those are the pieces that drive that. But Paul Lawrence and Nitin Nohria said, look, it goes beyond that. It's not just that money that is motivating us. And they had these 3 others. So that's the A, the acquire and achieve is the first drive, and that's the A drive. The B drive is bond and belong. So we are social creatures. And so this gets a little bit to the point that you were talking about, and that we work in teams. But it's amazing what we will do in order to make sure that we maintain positive relationships with our teammates and with the people that we work with. So this is one that is often overlooked in companies, but is really powerful in order to drive that motivation and to get people working together. And then the third one is the C drive, and that's challenge and comprehend. So we're driven by this desire to continually learn, to be challenged in our work. I always talk about this as my video drive, my video game drive. The idea that if you play a video game and you master level 1, and then you go to level 2, and it's no harder. There's no more challenge to it, and you get through level 2 really easy, and you go to level 3, and it's not any harder. You really don't get excited about that game and you don't play it for very long. You have to continually raise the bar, and it has to get a little bit harder every single time. Otherwise, it's not really motivating for us. So that's the level that we're talking about there from a challenge perspective. And then the final drive, the D drive, is the one that's a little bit difficult to explain. It's defend and define. And so Lawrence and Nohria talked about this, that we were tribal in nature and we would defend the tribe. We don't necessarily have tribes anymore, but sometimes organizations, our teams, can become a surrogate tribe. And so we defend those tribes, and we defend them when our definition of ourselves, of who we are and what's important to us, aligns with the definition that the team or the organization has. So that's that define part of it. So when you're talking about the four drive model, that's the basics of the four drive model, which really gets to employee motivation and various different things. If you have all four of those, if you satisfy all four of those, you're pretty good at motivating. Most times when you go into organizations, they're good at one or maybe two of those, but they're kind of not as good on the others. So with that, from a team perspective, what you want is you want to make sure that you're maximizing each of those and making sure that all of them are coming into play. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but hopefully it gave you an overview.
Right. So it's definitely a evolution over the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's a lot more sort of, let's say, structured and a more sort of, actionable way of looking at, employees. So if you look at, a typical, team setup, what we find is that, very often, as you said, the organizations, try and focus on the acquire, and they give good salaries and stuff like that, and maybe good bonuses at the end of the year. So they incentivize individual performance, and they incentivize, individual achievement, and they celebrate it also sometimes, in forums. So how do you sort of, align the team to, the incentive structure, or you align your team to this reward mechanism so that the team feels rewarded, and it's not about the individual anymore. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't want to dissuade that individual incentives and payouts aren't important. They are. People, as we said, that acquire piece is a big piece of this. And oftentimes that acquire element is, look, I need to know that my effort is going to be rewarded for what I do. And sometimes when you're on a team, you feel like I do all the work. And then if the entire team gets rewarded, that doesn't necessarily feel fair. And fairness is another whole big piece on motivation and various different pieces. That being said, I've worked with lots of companies about setting up different incentive plans and various different pieces. And so you can typically have an individual component and still marry that or tie that with a team component. And so that you have elements of both, so that you are looking at, hey, here's your individual pay. That's based upon your merit, your individual performance, and various different pieces. So your annual increases, all of those factors come into that. You may have a portion of a bonus or an incentive that is tied to individual metrics that you have, but then you can have larger portions or at least an equivalent portion that is tied to a team metric. So tied to something that you can measure that is based on the team. And as I mentioned before, one of the interesting aspects of this that sometimes gets in the way is people go, oh, well, there are going to be these laggards that, if you have a couple really high performing people on the team, they're going to make the team successful. And then all the people who aren't actually working very hard are going to get the reward for that as well. What we find, though, is that there is elements of other aspects of behavioral science that lend it to this element that says, hey, if I'm on a team, particularly if the team has ways of giving feedback to each other in a safe way, but in a positive way, then I don't want to be the person who is bringing the team down. There's actually a really strong motivation not to be that individual who is pulling the team back. And so I will actually be more motivated to go above and beyond what I would normally do if I am part of a team, particularly if the rest of the team is depending upon me. Now, there's certain aspects of how you set up your team, which is different than the reward system for how that works, making sure that everybody on the team feels psychologically safe, that they feel like they are a wanted partner within the team, and that they're not the ones that are being dismissed and not be getting any aspects of that. So there's a lot that goes into that, but you can set up team rewards. And even just beyond that, I would say, even beyond the reward structure, I think organizations oftentimes, and maybe in India this is different. I'm not as aware there, but the idea that, hey, we don't allow time for people to just have conversations with their team, to get to know each other, to spend some time that isn't always like focused in on work, that you actually get time to meet the people and know who they are and know them beyond just the, hey, you're accountant number 348 over here that's on my team, and you do the payroll processing, and that's it. You want to get to know them as a person, their family, what their likes, their interests are. You should ask them what their Twitter personality profile is. There you go.
Right. Right. And ask them whether they are funnier than they think, right? That too.
Well, I would definitely fail on that one. So
yeah, so that's very interesting. But in these COVID related circumstances, and especially now, a lot of companies are sort of also thinking about whether they need to continue with this work from home, or they need to work on a hybrid model. And especially in team-based setups, so if I'm doing an individual job, it's possible for you to sort of monitor and measure and engage with people also. But if in a team-based job and you're working from home, there's very little opportunity for social interaction. Obviously there are Zoom calls, but there's death due to Zoom. That's the new sort of catchphrase that's going around. So how do you sort of work around these kind of issues which we are facing currently, and how do you look at these for creative and media and marketing type of organizations which need people to bounce off ideas of each other and to feed into each other's energies?
Yeah, it's a big issue, particularly as things are starting to come back together in the United States. It's lots of organizations are looking at that. I think around the world, this is one of those facets that over the next couple of years is going to be a huge element. How do you take this world that has gone into lockdown and work from home and various different pieces for many of these organizations, and maintain the benefits of that? There are lots of benefits from being able to work from home, from a work-life balance, and being able to not have a 30-minute, an hour commute on each way, all of those factors and various different pieces. And there's actually research that shows that individual productivity, as you said, has been increased when you're at work from home in many sectors. This isn't across the board, obviously, but on average, productivity has not declined. It has either stayed the same or increased. So how do you, as an organization, how do you maintain that? And as you said, creative elements, there's a lot of value coming from the interaction between people. It's that, as you said, the jagged edges, right? When people meet, that dynamics that you have spur a lot of that creativity. But there's also this element of, if you have senior people and you have younger people, that those interactions that are in person help that younger person learn the business and be able to expand. So there's some key aspects around that. One of the things that is missing in the individual, in the work from home piece, is this element of connection that we have in these what are called bump in moments. Those moments that you're in the hallway, the moments that you're in the lunchroom, the moments that you are right before a meeting comes together and you're the only 2 or 3 people in the room as you're waiting for everybody else to come in. And those are the moments that we often do recognition and thank yous and kind of the interpersonal bonding pieces. And that doesn't happen on Zoom. So if you are still working remotely and working from home, organizations need to figure out ways to be able to have that happen, to make sure that they are, as one of our guests on our podcast talked about, emotionally proofreading their communication so that you are recognizing. So for instance, the idea that when you go into a meeting, you meet somebody in the hallway, that's where you kind of go, oh, hey, thank you for that email that you sent out last week. It clarified everything. I get it now. And it was so nice to have that. And it's just that little bit of reinforcement, that recognition of what you did. And we don't do that over Zoom. We don't do that when we're here. We don't go, oh, hey, by the way, because it just doesn't seem natural.
That's great. And, coming to the fact that you talked about recognition, that, people are bumping across each other and recognizing them and stuff like that, that plays a big role in creative organizations, because people are more tentatively creative or media, or people are very sensitive, and they say that one way to look at that is that they need a lot of reassurance, because every time it's not like a mechanical job that they keep doing the same thing over and over. Every time you start a new project or a new campaign or new strategy, it's a new challenge, and you need to start from scratch and basically from first principles. So how do you see the role of recognition in these kind of organizations? That's question number one. And the second thing is that you pointed out about people, juniors meeting the seniors and stuff like that. I mean, in many organizations, that creates a sense of alignment, because at this point of time, we are so disconnected from let's say the seniors or the leaders. Typically, in most organizations, there isn't, free flow of communication. There isn't enough, sort of alignment that is happening between what the top leader is envisioning and what the people down are feeling or they're connected to.
You talk about creatives and various different pieces, and it's important for them. It's important for everybody. We are all recognition seeking people. Even, there's the extroverts and introverts, and people often go, well, introverts don't want to be recognized. They do. They actually really do. They just like recognition in a different way. They don't necessarily want to get up on stage and have an award handed to them in front of 50 people. They want to have that one-on-one recognition with their manager. So recognition is one of those aspects that I think often gets relegated to the end of the year or at certain specific moments where, we're having this specific meeting, various different pieces around that, quarterly, whatever that would be. And that's not the best way to do recognition. Recognition at its best is authentic. It's timely. So in other words, if I see you doing something good, I don't wait till the end of the quarter to recognize you around that. I recognize you as soon as I can. And recognition comes in lots of different ways. You can win awards, as I said, you can have all of those. Those are fantastic. Those are great. People strive to kind of be that. And particularly if you have clear parameters around what those are, those can be very motivational as well as rewarding. But people also really crave recognition that is personal, that comes in the form of, I saw how you interacted with that customer and the way that you handled his or hers, objections was brilliant. Thank you for that. And having that said is wonderful. What's even better is if you can write a card or write a note and have that be personal, even an email, as much as it's not as personal as a handwritten note, that goes a long way, because that is something that people can refer back to. We've done lots of interviews with employees from around the world. And one of the questions we often ask is, what's your most memorable, recognition that you've ever had? And many times people talk about their big bonus that they got, or the trip to Hawaii or Paris or wherever that would be. But just as often, it's the people that said, I got this handwritten note from my VP or my CEO. And it's up a couple levels. Maybe it's not even up a couple levels. Sometimes it can just be from your manager. And that's really important. And so you have to be purposeful in looking out for places to recognize people, and particularly, as you said, creatives. There's an element of having a positive, it's called the Pygmalion effect, actually, in or the placebo effect, right? We talked about that before the show started, that this idea that if I feel like I'm doing really good work, I will actually, my brain, there's facets of my brain that will change, that then I will actually do better work. And Pygmalion effect was a really interesting study where they took kids that were in a school, and they basically told the teacher that these kids scored really high on this intelligence test, when in fact they hadn't. It was just random. They just picked random kids, but the kids that they said performed better on this IQ test, at the end of the year when they tested them, actually did improve much higher than anybody else in the class, because they told the teacher set those expectations, the teacher started treating them differently, and their performance, thus their self-identity, changed and they improved. The same thing can happen in an organization. The same thing, if you put those expectations of excellence and you say you are doing great work and these are great things, that actually lends itself into people's self-identity, and they take that on and they start performing better. So there's a lot of great things about recognition. The second question that you had was in regards to, what was it again?
It was regard to the alignment. So first of all, I must recognize that you gave very good insights, Doctor. So immediately I'm recognizing what you said. But, but
thank you. There you go. See?
Yeah. So the other thing was regarding communication and alignment. So
Oh yes.
yeah. So in a Zoom kind of a scenario, people don't meet, so there's very little communication that is happening, because most organizations do not have processes or, let's say, systems where there's regular communication between the top and bottom and vice versa, and there is very little alignment in terms of goals and stuff like that. So a lot of that happens over meetings, over personal, in the conference rooms, or people bumping into each other, or mentoring and all that. So all that is sort of absent in the Zoom world. That's one. And second is, even if the world resumes back to completely normal, even then communication and alignment is a major issue, especially in large organizations where people are detached in their levels of hierarchies and matrices, and you're trapped in a silo and you can't sort of look beyond your cubicle. So how do you deal with that? And in a creative or a media marketing organization, that can really demotivate you and can affect you emotionally, which affects your creative output, can affect also your let's say even your strategic thinking also to an extent, because if you don't know what the goals are, then how do you sort of align it and how do you make strategies accordingly?
Yeah, you touch on a really important piece here, and we find this all the time with the surveys that we do with employees and the qualitative interviews that we do. As much as you as a leader think that you are communicating the big picture to your employees, you're not doing it enough. I don't care if you think you're doing it way too much, you still need to double that. You need to do it 3 times as much, right? You need to make sure that that is part of almost every single conversation that you have, and that you need to increase the number of conversations that you have significantly by a factor of 5 at minimum for most leaders. This idea that you tell somebody the big picture or the strategy or our mission, and they instantly grab it and they internalize it and they understand how it applies to them. If you just do that once or twice or at our monthly meetings, that should be enough, right? Because we've told them, we're really clear about what we're doing. That's not how people operate. That's not how we actually process information in various different pieces. And so the idea that you as a leader need to communicate more and more about those facets is key. The other thing that I think that was really important that you talked about here is this connection between senior leaders and other people within the organization. And oftentimes there's many different layers in between me and maybe the president or even my vice president of the company. And the more that you can, if you're at one of those senior levels, the more that you can interact with the people who are multiple layers below you, and we've worked with CEOs of companies to do listening sessions. So we will have them go out, and oftentimes this is again where we do it in an informal setting. So there's a formal part of it that maybe there might be a presentation or different pieces, but they're with the frontline workers, whoever that would be. But then there's also some informal piece over a dinner or cocktails or drinks or something, and you have those one-on-one conversations, and then tied with that listening session. So that's in a group. So you get this, but you also try to do one-on-one sessions with people. And so that's a lot of work. And oftentimes leaders go, that's not my job. My job is to strategy and different pieces. And I would disagree. I would disagree that your job is, yes, strategy and mission are important, but your job is also making sure that the people who are driving that within the organization understand it to the level that you do. And
that's great. And now, I mean, if you look at so many technologies are there, right, from Slacks and messaging tools, the amount of options that you have has increased tremendously over the last 10, 15 years, but is still, I think it's more of an attitude or awareness or, sensitization issue than, the ability to do that. For example, even on a Zoom call, you can now talk to 5,000 people sitting all in various locations. You can have customers coming on to Zoom call and talking about. So now, I mean, many of the barriers that existed before are no longer there. But I think I agree with your point. There is very little sensitization, and there is an issue of understanding of their job in terms of, whether they need to communicate, that is a key element of their job and key role that they need to perform. And also to break it down to somebody at a very junior level. So if I'm a truck driver, what am I doing as a truck driver to improve, let's say, my distribution service? So for example, or improving the sales or service to the thing. So also breaking down to what it means for me rather than just what it means for you is also, I found, something that is also missing from how they are communicating.
Yeah, and you talk. I mean, a lot of the listeners here are marketers and advertisers and different things. So they're experts in communication. They should be. And one of the things that I often see companies not do is take that expertise and apply it internally. So you can take the ability to have a fantastic graphical design that uses some infographics that conveys this, that helps people put it in perspective for themselves, that what is the value that I'm bringing to this story? What is the value that the company expects from me? And if you put that in and apply it to your own people, then you are actually ahead of the curve, because those are all really important pieces, as you mentioned.